All right, I'd like to welcome everyone again today to this Proposition 123 Expedited Review Guidance and Strategies webinar. This is the second of two webinars we're holding this week to provide folks an opportunity to learn about the requirements. And you'll have an opportunity to see the guidance that is now published on DOLA's website for future reference. Again, we'll just take a few more minutes to let folks connect before we get started. All right, we have quite a few people registered for today's session. And if some of my co-hosts could help keep an eye on the waiting room and make sure that people are able to join once we get started. Appreciate the help. All right, well, without further ado, I'll get started. My name is Robin DeFalco. I'm with the Division of Local Government within DOLA, or Department of Local Affairs. We'll introduce the rest of my colleagues and co-presenters in a moment this morning. And if you're here for the Expedited Review Guidance webinar, you're in the right place. Let's proceed to the next slide. So in today's agenda, we'll welcome and do some introductions in the beginning. I will note this webinar will probably take about 1 hour, and we have an hour and a half in case folks want to stay on and ask questions. But there's a good chance we'll be done within 1 hour. We will review the process that DOLA has undergone for the past 6 months, developing these guidance materials in collaboration with key partners and stakeholders across the state of Colorado. We'll provide an overview of the online guidance materials, what they contain, and then an overview of the statutory language, the law, and when it applies, when expedited review is required. Then we'll get into a deeper analysis and tease out the details in that statutory language. We'll present a number of strategies for you to consider. Each community may consider a combination of strategies in order to implement a system for expedited review. And the end of the guidance has some community examples across Colorado, and then we'll wrap up the webinar. I did want to note this disclaimer that you see on the screen, which is that this information and the guidance materials presented today are not intended to serve as legal advice. Any interested person is encouraged to consult with an attorney with respect to any particular legal matter. Next slide. All right, so brief introductions for the team and my co-presenters today. Again, my name is Robin DeFalco. I'm with Division of Local Government. If my colleague Andy is here, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Andy Hill. I manage the Community Development Office in the Division of Local Government at DOLA. And I can pass it to Mo.
All right. Mo Miskell is with us here today from the Division of Housing. He let us know that his internet connectivity is having a little trouble, but he is with us and hopefully will be able to help with answering questions. And Melissa Nearison is also with Division of Housing. Melissa, are you here to say hello? She may be able to join a little bit later. And then I will pass it over to our consulting team. Josh, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Robin. Hi, everyone. Josh Olhava. I'm with Ayers Associates, a multidisciplinary consulting firm out here in kind of the Western Colorado region. I am our Western planning lead and helping DOLA along with these guidance documents with my partner in crime, TJ. Over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. TJ DeLubeck with Community Planning Strategies. Very excited to be bringing forward this presentation and the guidance for the communities throughout Colorado with this team. So thanks all for being here.
All right. So what you see here on the slide is the process to date and all the efforts that went into this guidance document. We started out kind of in the mid-late November timeframe around Thanksgiving with some kickoff calls. And then kind of into December, doing some initial partner agency discussions, which we'll talk about some of those partner agencies here in a little bit, as well as our stakeholders that were with us throughout the process, which you see those meetings pop up over the series of months into just last month. And then also really getting a survey out there. And I know a lot of you were involved with that survey and took part in that survey. So thank you very much for your insights to help frame this guidance document and the materials. And so again, you can kind of see the evolution here from, you know, that November timeframe to where we are today in terms of who's reviewed and who's taken a look at everything. This guidance material has gone through DOLA, and the team here, all of our stakeholders, our partner agencies took a look at, as well as the Attorney General did review it from that legal standpoint as well to make sure what we were saying, you know, aligned with the Prop 123 statute language. And we also worked a couple times with the drafters of the Prop 123 language just to ensure that you know, what the intent was, what it says, and kind of how that relates at the local level for you all. All right. Next slide here. So here you can see the kind of breakdown of all of our different partner agencies at the top. So the top box includes all the partner agencies that were involved early on. And then once we had the draft guidance, and we also had a couple offline separate meetings with some of these individuals as they had questions. So a lot of different agencies throughout the state, Colorado Municipal League, APA, American Planning Association. You see a lot of housing and home builder groups as well. Really getting those different perspectives from all the different angles. And so again, a lot of great individuals and groups involved in kind of this effort. And then you see the next box down is the local government representation. So, you know, having over 65 planners from across the state and various regions throughout the state was very exciting to have those individuals, as well as our developer partners along through the journey, being able to review things and letting us know how things related and worked at their local level. I will say that we also worked with tribal partners, had conversations with some of our tribal partners throughout the state, and really understanding how these guidelines affect them and work within their unique government structures. So as Robin mentioned, the online guidance materials are available online, and the link's available at the end of the presentation. It's in the chat and everything like that as well. But the guidance materials really broke down into various sections. And our presentation and webinar here is going to go through them in kind of this order as well. And so there is kind of that general introduction, you know, the overview and how it applies. And then we're going to dive into some summary of the Prop 123 interpretations. So what does that language truly mean? And then also the strategies overview. And so those are developed in a little bit more detail online and a little bit more expanded content. So the Prop 123 language and interpretations are broken out into kind of an FAQ style. A lot of the questions we heard through our different discussions, the survey questions we received comments back on, we use that to really build out those FAQs. And so that really helps to kind of guide you all in your efforts moving forward. And then, of course, strategies, we really did a great side-by-side comparison analysis, which TJ will talk about a little bit more later on here. Where we took a lot of the survey responses again and kind of did a side-by-side analysis with strategies and provide some community examples for you all to be able to research, look into, and see what works again for you at the local level, because it is very context, local driven processes here. So here we have our first dive in. So this is the overview. You know, really want to emphasize that this guidance material, everything we're talking about here, is only for the expedited review requirements of Proposition 123. And, you know, really getting into that, some of you have already done commitments under this first round of commitment cycle, which is from 2023 to early 2026. And we just want you to know that the expedited review process isn't required until that 2027 timeframe. And when you go to make commitments for the second round by November 1st, 2026, that's when an expedited review process needs to be in place for that round, for those local commitments that you make at that time. There are grants available, local capacity grant programs that can help support policy adoption, process improvement work, to really help you get to the expedited review processes and help you with your processes and procedures internally. Good planning, good process improvement work. If any of you have been involved with process improvement work, it takes time. And it's something that it is kind of that continuous improvement. So we definitely encourage you all to, start early, start looking at your local processes, procedures, how things are moving through your local processes, and being able to make adjustments over time. So that way, when it comes down to having to meet the requirements with that 2026 commitment and 2027 date, you have something in place that works for you and that achieves the goals of Proposition 123, which is for local governments and private entities to work together in partnership to create more housing opportunities and more affordable housing throughout the state and within your communities. Something important to note is that DOLA has worked with a few different communities that have already done this and built out a template resolution that you all can find online. And that template resolution, again, very base template, but you can take it and customize it to fit your needs to really help align with Proposition 123 and the expedited review process, which we'll get into some of those more detailed requirements here in a little bit. The last thing to note is that a developer can opt out of the expedited review process for any reason. And so if there are things going on or there are some different variables, there is an opportunity for that developer to opt out of that process. All right, before we dive into the actual language of Proposition 123 and what it means, we also want to highlight the program applicability. And so it is, expedited review processes are not required for every project. We want to make that very clear. These are not required for every project within your community. However, the expedited review is required for projects that have 50% or more of the units as affordable. So, if your development has 50 units in total and 25 or more are determined as affordable, which we'll talk about what affordable means here in a second, then you would have the expedited review criteria kick in under Proposition 123. And so something to note, and this is something that we heard and has a few questions about at the last webinar series and over time, is that these guidance materials that we're providing here and that are available online, they are not related to the compliance criteria for Proposition 123 requirements. That is a separate piece and a separate thing to come. That the local government baseline or commitments, that is a separate piece and a separate element of this overall effort. And that the Proposition 123 funding program requirements are different. So again, we really want to emphasize that this is about the expedited review portion. So the Proposition under Prop 123, there is some terminology on what affordable housing means and what that term of affordable means. And so for rental housing, we're looking at or below 60% of the area median income, AMI. And then the same for sale is going to be at or below 100% of the AMI. In addition to those criteria, there also has to be that the housing costs less than 30% of a household monthly income. So you have the 60%, you have the 100%, and so whichever camp you're in, rental, for sale, and then that 30%. And something that's important to note, because I think a lot of our housing studies and assessments out there look at gross monthly income. This is about contractor-based monthly income. And so the difference is that contractor base is the rent or mortgage component, whereas the gross would typically include insurance and utility costs. Yes, Robin.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to pause and unpack that a little bit more. We also have a great question in the chat that kind of relates to this. So I want to start with Kaylee's question in the chat, asking us to clarify, when should this expedited process be in place? Is it by November 1st, 2026 or January 1st, 2027? And that is a great question. The local governments will file a commitment by November 1st, 2026, if they'd like to remain eligible for Prop 123 in the next 3-year cycle. The previous slide, Josh, actually shows this, so it might be helpful to reference, and then we'll come back to this one. So ideally, by November 1st of 2026, you have implemented a system for expedited review of affordable housing. And you'll be able to demonstrate that when you file that commitment by November 1st of 2026. The law, however, says that it's not required until 2027. So if you've adopted a policy that says this rule takes effect January 1st of 2027, in theory, that also works. But I think for most folks, really get that in place by the time you file your next commitment by November 1st of 2026. So then back to the other question or the other slide. As Josh was noting, because in the last webinar, we did have a lot of questions on this point. A lot of folks had questions about, well, which units count, and is this related to my baseline or my local government commitment? Is this related to funding programs? If my project gets funding from Prop 123, does that mean expedited review is required? So we want to just pause and clarify that nope, none of that is what triggers the requirement for expedited review. First of all, everyone should have a policy in place that achieves expedited review for projects that meet the criteria. And so you're going to look at a specific housing project application and say, does it have 50% or more of the units defined as affordable? This definition of affordability is in the Prop 123 statute, but we also want to emphasize that your policy would use this definition as a minimum standard or a floor. Your policy, your local government policy on expedited review it could, if you choose to, have a broader definition. You might say, we want to, if a project has 25% of the units affordable, we still want to give that developer this incentive and expedite that project. If it has higher AMIs, you might say, we still want to support that and give it expedited review. So those are the kinds of things that you want to consider in your local policy adoption. So you have some latitude to develop your policy as long as it meets this minimum standard. So hopefully that was good clarifying. If there are any other questions on that point, please raise your hand, come off mic, drop something in the chat or the Q&A. We'll try to address it. But again, I'll let Josh keep moving along since I don't see any other questions. And
Perfect.
Go ahead, Josh, take it away.
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, perfect clarifying comments. As you can see, there's a lot to unpack under these 3 paragraphs, which we're going to start diving into here. So as we mentioned earlier, our whole team here, Dola and TJ and myself, we really worked with the stakeholders, partner agencies through a lot of these pieces. And there's a lot to unpack and really to understand. Yeah, Robin, did you have another question before we dove in?
Actually, we did get one more question in the chat,
Cool.
and I think it's a good one, asking
Perfect.
for clarifying about the 30% of household income. So maybe if we could just go back to that slide.
Yep.
And Mo, if your connection's stable and you want to jump in, please do. So when we talk about 30% of household income, that usually means either gross household income, which would include utilities plus your monthly rent, versus contract income, which is what's on your lease agreement, right? So for the purposes of this definition of affordable housing, which is specifically referring to which units count towards a local government commitment, my understanding, Mo, correct me if that's not correct, is that contract rent, which is just the base rent in someone's lease agreement, is what would be considered in this definition.
That's exactly right.
Thank
Yep.
you.
So anything outside of that base rent would not count towards that 30% in this particular exercise.
Perfect. Thanks, Mo. Thanks, Robin. Any other questions before we move on? Got a thumbs up, so no right now. We'll have a few other pause moments as we move along, and we can definitely come back to some of this. And I think it is great to know that, the state and DOLA really looked at that contract piece, because there are outliers that you can't always control at the local level, such as insurance or utility costs, things like that. And so it really does help to kind of focus that down to the variables that can be controlled with the market and things like that. So let's move on here. So as I was saying, yeah, we worked with the team on a lot of this unpacking of the language. And so what you'll see here on this line and as we move forward is kind of a breakdown analysis of these three big paragraphs in Proposition 123 that have to do with expedited review criteria. There's a lot of technical legal language in there that can sometimes make it hard to interpret, and you can interpret it a lot of different ways depending on the intent and understanding how it came to be. And so what we've done is really work again with all those different agencies, our partners, our stakeholders, which a lot of you are part of along the way, to really help craft this and make sense of the language. To really help you when you go to work on your local processes. And so this paragraph 2A, it establishes the basic requirements and criteria for the expedited review process. And again, in order to be eligible, governments must establish the expedited review process for certain application types. We're going to talk about those application types here in a little bit. And that is for, again, at least 50% of the units as affordable, and you can adjust that locally, as Robin was saying, and that a final decision of a complete application, you can hear the emphasis here, final decision, complete application, must be made within 90 calendar days. So we're going to dive into that here next. And so what you have here, and definitely hard to put graphics or anything fun with some of this language because it is very technical language. So definitely want to apologize for so much text on a slide, but want to make sure that you all have the resources and tools you need. But the 90 calendar day timeframe for the expedited review process is from a complete application submittal to a final decision on specific application types. And so there are separate 90 calendar day timeframes per application. It's by application. So a site plan, that's application 1. Building permit, that's an entirely different application. So those are 2 applications. Of course, you'll hear us say this a couple times. We definitely want to encourage overlapping and running concurrent processes where possible, because the intent is to get housing built, and however we need to do that. And so always thinking of it from that partnership lens. And again, a complete application submittal, that's deemed at your local level. So a lot of local governments have a completeness process before it gets into the formal development review cycle. And so that process that it takes to really get the application complete, to be able to deem it complete and accept it and start reviewing it, that's not counted towards your 90 calendar days. It's when you deem it complete. So that's where you have some of that control to continue to work and make sure that something is clean and polished where you need it with the criteria that you have established. A final decision that can include approval or denial. We don't want to just say it's approval because you can't always guarantee that something's going to be approved, but it is approval or denial. And we did include a couple examples of what that does not include, just for clarity. It doesn't include the recommendation of a recommending body. So if you require a site plan or a process like this to go from planning commission as a recommendation to your town board or council, it's at that town board council decision process, not the planning commission recommendation. And then if it's more administrative, if it's a director making an administrative approval or denial decision, that's when that decision is made. That's when that 90 days, that expedited review process ends. And it doesn't stop through the process, but there are extensions which we'll actually dive into in the next couple sections when we get there. So, again, there's a 90-day limit, but there are these exceptions and extensions that were built into the process through the statute. So here are the common application types that we dove into, we reviewed with all of our partners and stakeholders to really break down these different common application types on what is required for expedited review, what may be required or possibly required, depending on unique variables, which we'll talk about here in just a second. And then those application types, those common application types that would not be required to follow an expedited review process or the criteria that we're talking about here. And so a lot of those ones on the left column, I think are more straightforward for a lot of individuals, administrative modifications, building permit, development plan or site plan, conditional use or special use applications. And likewise, I'm going to jump to the far right side, those that are not required, the annexation, comprehensive plan amendments, appeals, rezoning, subdivisions, which are explicitly stated in statute. However, those ones in the middle, the ones that may be required, We have accessory use permits, civil or construction drawings, master plan, PUD and PUD amendments. And so a couple examples of when those may or may not apply is a civil or construction drawing set. It would be required to follow the process if it was part of your site plan application and site plan drawing set, because that site plan would be subject to it. Now, similarly, planned unit development, PUDs. Every community kind of treats those a little differently. Sometimes a PUD is simply just a zoning document, establishing some base zoning criteria and uses and what's allowed, what's not allowed. That would fall in more the zoning side, so it wouldn't be required. But if your PUD is more of a full development plan with the detailed site-specific criteria, and it met the criteria of the 50%, affordable units and everything within there, then it would fall into being required to follow the expedited review process. So that's kind of an example of where those maybe situations fall into. And so hopefully that helps to shed a little bit of light on this. And this whole list and all this breakdown is available online through the guidance document. And there's additional backup language that kind of talks about those examples and those situations to help you out when you're interpreting that. Any questions on that before we jump into the second paragraph of the Proposition 123 expedited review? I'll pause for a moment. Anything on the chat or comments?
We just had a question about whether the slides would be shared, and I want to reassure folks that yes, we will share the slides and the recording of today's session on our expedited review guidance webpage, and we'll share that webpage with you towards the end of today's session.
Perfect. Thank you, Robin. Well, with that, we'll move on to the second paragraph of expedited review, Proposition 123. So paragraph 2B, this states that local governments, your local policies and procedures can allow a developer's extension, and that can be up to 90 days. And this is to address comments from an agency that has approval authority over the application. And in addition, those rare instances where there's a state law or court order that may impact that application. So let's dive into those details here in a little bit. Right. So what we want to emphasize here is that this is an optional tool. It's an optional 90 calendar day developer extension that you can incorporate as part of your local expedited review process. It is a one-time developer request per application. The way it's written in statute, it is very singular, which you'll see is a difference with the local government one here we'll talk about in a little bit. So it is that one time. Think of it as an addition extension on top of that 90 calendar days. So if you need a full 90 calendar day extension on top of your 90 calendar day process for expedited review, that would give you 180 days. But you can have less. If the developer is asking for an extension and they only need 40 days, 30 days, you would have that on top of the 90 days. But that is just that one extension. The rest of the time, unfortunately, doesn't be counted because it is just that one-time extension. And again, this is for additional time to address comments from agencies with approval authority. And we've provided a couple examples here as well as online. Think of, state agencies that may have special requirements through your review process. You can think of, Division of Wildlife, sometimes CDOT, or other agencies that they have to sign off. They have to give approval for that application to even be approved at the local level. Similarly, think of life safety elements. So a building permit could also be a site plan where a fire department has to sign off on that application because of life safety elements in their purview. And so in those cases where the fire agency is an external agency or tied in has approval authority, those are instances where if they had to make changes to a building permit, had to modify the site plan to meet those criteria, a developer could request that extension if it was included as one of your tools for the expedited review process. So if there's no other questions, we're going to jump into the last paragraph of Proposition 123. Oh, go ahead, Robin.
We did have a question from Michael
Perfect.
asking, what about lot line adjustments?
Yes, so lot line adjustments, we had that captured. I'm going the wrong way. Sorry about that. So we kind of had it here, subdivision, plat, division of land, minor plats, lot line adjustments. I would say that's all within kind of that subdivision process. subdivision criteria. Lot of local governments set it up that way. At that point, it's just a terminology thing, but we do have some of those examples a little bit more fleshed out, some additional bullets online. So that's a great question.
And one more question from Sarah. Can your policy request submissions by certain dates each month in order to receive the 90 days expedited review? It's a good question. I'm not thinking there's anything that would prohibit that.
No, you could request that applications have to be submitted at a certain time, that resubmittals have to be made at a certain time. That's where you have kind of that local control over your process and your relationship with a development entity applicant. So you could build that in, right? Like you're giving them this opportunity, this flexibility and creativity to be able to get through the process, but it's a two-way street and it's a true partnership. So you got to work together. And I think you'll hear a little bit more when we get into the local government's extension opportunities too, and then in the next section.
And just a follow-up comment that came in here from Sarah. I'm thinking about our planning commission schedule as they meet once a month. So we would want plans in a certain amount of time before their meetings. That's a great example of why you would set a deadline, and you would make that clear in your guidance to applicants that in order to achieve expedited review, we will need your application to be submitted and complete by this date, right? We do have another comment, and I am reading questions and comments from the chat aloud so that we capture it in our recording. Lynn says, how are you differentiating between master plans and comp plan amendments? Are they the same? And one is an amendment.
So the master plan, so it's comprehensive plan / comprehensive plan amendment, because it is a little bit higher level. Typically your comprehensive plan amendments don't get into site specific details where you would know if that is affordable housing development and what the numbers and thresholds are. Master plan, that's where it could be either way, because sometimes you can have a large development area and it just gets master planned at a high level of kind of big bubble diagrams and areas of kind of envisioned future land uses. So you wouldn't have that level of detail. There's times where a master plan, kind of like the PUD description and discussion, sometimes master plans can get into that site level detail or those site specific elements like a PUD plan can and cannot. So that's where it starts to go in between the required or not required, is if you have that level of detail and that specificity, got it right this time, that gets into the knowing that it's affordable, that knowing that there's a certain number of units and all the criteria that goes along with that. So that's where you start to adjust that middle point.
And I think what Josh just said is a really key point. If you don't know that a certain project, that a certain parcel is going to have X number of affordable housing units involved, you can't determine whether or not expedited review is required. An application has to be at the point where you know those details about the project in order to determine that expedited review is required. So great question.
And I would say, there's been projects from public sector that I know planners and myself have worked on in the past where the developer doesn't know that even going into it yet, or they don't know their numbers going into it. And that's just where you'll have to have that local conversation of, do we want to try and afford the expedited review process thinking that they may hit 50% or more, whatever the threshold you set, versus we just don't know at all. So let's start it through our process. And then it comes up maybe halfway through, and then you kind of work out between the two agencies what you're going to do kind of moving it forward. And so again, there is some of that unknown, and unfortunately law and guidance can only provide so much in that ambiguity in the unknown space. And that's where, again, it gives you some of that local control through your process to be able to build that partnership with the development community and work on it together. Perfect. Anything else in the chat? I unfortunately can't see the chat because of all my other screens, so I apologize. I have to turn to Robin.
No other questions or comments, so please go ahead and to the next section.
All right. So the last Proposition 123 expedited review paragraph. This one gets into local governments policies and procedures that could allow extensions, 30 calendar day extensions, and emphasis there is the plural, extensions. So these are really, again, another tool that allows the local government to work again with the development community to extend the process. And this is for additional information, revisions, other things that the staff need to kind of review through the process. And we'll talk kind of how to use that, because it can go in a lot of different ways. And we wanted to provide some examples and some parameters to help guide you on how to use these extensions in through your local process. Right. I'm on the right slide here. Perfect. All right. So again, this is a 30-day calendar extension tool. So it's something that you don't have to require, don't have to have as your process, but you may want to incorporate it. This allows additional time for both parties to address substantial comments, because of course, if at the local level you're providing comments that require big changes or big modifications, you want to have the time to review what comes back in addition to giving the developer and the applicant time to make those big comments, because they don't just happen. And so this is we kind of broke down how this could work and how the statute is written to provide guidance on how this works. So local government, as a local government rep on that, you would notify the developer of the intent to extend the process, in writing, email. And then the developers in statute says that they're encouraged to respond within 5 business days, acknowledging that extension request. And so want to emphasize that the extension is implemented. It includes the 30 calendar days. So you have 30 calendar days plus that time that the developer took to respond. So if the developer took the full 5 days to respond, you then have that 35 days. If they took 4 days, 34 days, took 6, 36. So, right, they're encouraged to respond within 5. If they take 10, right, as the local government, you don't want to be penalized for having to wait for that correspondence and that communication. So here's some best practice on how the optional 30 calendar day extension could be used. And really the emphasis here is that it's for those unique circumstances and delays that are kind of outside of the control of the developer or the local government. So the few examples we have here include, the incomplete resubmittal of application materials. If they come forward and things are missing that were requested, there's substantial errors. Want to make sure that you have the time to be able to go back, get those addressed, and then continue the review process. Think of substantial changes to the overall application. So, that second submittal really looks like a brand new first submittal. As a local government, you have to have the time to be able to do your review to make sure you are protecting the public health, safety, welfare, that we're all charged to do. If a developer becomes non-responsive in the process and their team, you submit the comments back, and after a couple of weeks, you shoot a response and don't hear anything, right? You want to be able to have that time to be able to figure out what's going on, be able to extend the process so that it's not counting towards the overall process and the 90 calendar day process. So another one that we really wanted to capture were those unexpected delays that occurred during the hearing process. I'm sure none of us have experienced this, but every once in a while there can be clerical errors. There can be issues, when you post something in the newspaper, the letters go out and something gets held up and it can't hit your 10 or 15 calendar day public notice requirements. So, you have to then unfortunately extend it to be able to do the notification accurately per your local charter or per state statute. So we want to make sure that that is a tool for that kind of a situation. And then the big one, really thinking of your recommending and or decision body. If the decision body has to continue the meeting, if it hits midnight and that item hasn't come up on the agenda yet and council has to disband because that's their clock, that gets continued, right? 2 more weeks, and that can impact the overall process and time frame. Similarly, if it goes back, if they recommend it goes back to the recommending body, planning commissioner, back to staff to work out details that may have come up during that hearing, want to make sure that the extension 30 calendar day extension tool for local governments is there, that you have that tool to be able to extend the overall process. So those are examples of when those would kind of come into play. And so with that, as you can see, there's a lot to unpack with those 3 paragraphs. And we've now hit kind of that point where we'll transition over to strategies. But first, want to make sure that there are no other questions or thoughts from anyone.
And we do have a couple of great questions in the chat. I will read them aloud again for the recording. Signy, I'm hoping I'm saying your name correctly, asks, for LIHTCs that are phased, LIHTC investor require that site be subdivided for separate ownership, even though not required by city or county, that only required simple site plan. Would a simple lot split be excluded from expedited 90-day process? That's a great question. I'm not sure I know the answer. The first question would be if it's 50% of the units are affordable or not. With LIHTC, sometimes that would be the case, but not always.
Yeah, so if it's a lot split, if you're kind of in that same minor subdivision, lot line adjustment, boundary line adjustment, subdivision, plat, I mean, those are all kind of under that not required side of things. I think in this situation, because it is subdivision specific, it's not site plan specific, even though you know that might be the product that's going in there, you know, those lot line adjustments, subdivisions, that's all exempted. You know, subdivisions are excluded per statute. So, you know, that can be minor. Some communities call it minor subdivision to adjust one lot line. So that's how we looked at it and how we broke it down. And I was going to turn it over to TJ to see if you had some additional thoughts on that.
Well, sorry for jumping in, Josh, but yeah, I mean, I think this is a good example where you have the flexibility to be more strict if you'd like, or more, you know, strict is a little bit of an odd term in that. But in this particular case, you could have that process that's combined with a site plan fall under the expedited review, the 90-day process. But by statute and what we're talking about, that would not be required to meet the 90 days.
All right, thanks, guys. We do have another question in the chat. I hope we've addressed that one. Kaylee also asked, does the developer have to respond to the notification of the extension, or can a local government consider the extension effective at the end of the 5 days?
That's a great question. So in statute, it doesn't say anything to that it is required that the developer respond. It just talks about them being encouraged to respond to that notification of the extension. And so that's about as far as, you know, we can build the parameters to. I think there's, you know, maybe some local process things that can be worked out. And as long as it's probably clear in your requirements, your, you know, comment letters, things like that. I think as long as you're being transparent that way, that you could create it in that sense. But yeah, Mo, I think I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, apologies, my connection stinks. I think I caught everything though. What the law says is the applicants shall provide such additional information or responses promptly. So there's a requirement that they do respond. And whenever practicable, provide a response within 5 business days. But the reality is they could take more if needed. So I don't think you can create something that requires it has to be within 5 days. That's my thought on that. But of course, it behooves them to respond sooner, because keep in mind, this is an extension of 30 days plus on top of the 90 days. And so if they want this process to be expedited, the sooner they respond, the sooner that particular clock can start ticking as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's why we include that applicant or developer becomes unresponsive as another example of why that you would use that 30-day extension tool.
We've got another great question in the chat from Sherry saying, the 30-day extensions appear to allow more than one extension. Is there an intent to cap these at 3 times 30 equals another 90 days? And I would say no. And just to clarify, the developers have the option for a 90-day extension. The local government has the option for a 30-day or multiple as needed. And again, kind of that best practices, if we're all striving for expedited review and a decision, as soon as possible, limit those 30-day extensions and only use them as necessary. But there is no specific language in the statute that limits how many 30 days. It's just plural. So we encourage you to limit them, but the statute doesn't require it. Anyone else want to comment on that? We really did have to get into the semantics with help from the law, the lawyers. Okay, any other questions before you move in? We are at almost 2:50. I predict that the next section will take at least another 15 minutes. We'll pause for questions throughout the next strategy section and community examples, but let's get started on that next section, and please share more questions as we go.
All right. Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Josh, for the transition. And here we go into the strategies portion of the guidance document. So as we developed the strategies, we really wanted to incorporate what we've been talking about quite a bit. Josh hit on a few times that we wanted to take what we heard from the stakeholders, the partner agencies, which included developers, the local government agencies, and tribal governments. And these initial discussions informed the questions that we had in the survey in order to better understand the challenges to meet the expedited review process requirements of Proposition 123. So based on the survey results, we were able to identify challenges that both the local governments as well as the applicants faced. These challenges were then grouped into 3 topic areas. Topic 1, as you can see on the screen there, was the quality of submission materials. Topic 2 was review timelines. Topic 3 was the staff capacities. We'll get into each of these in a little bit more detail. When we identified strategies that could address these challenges, we based those on recommendations and feedback that we heard through the survey, as well as our research and best practices that we researched from across the state and the country. And we also looked to many of you all and local governments here in Colorado to see what you all are doing for some examples. So lastly, this is, I think, really important, that we really wanted the guidance to emphasize the importance of developing partnerships between the reviewing agency and the applicant, rather than placing the blame on one side or the other. This partnership is necessary to meet the review period. We've heard that throughout. So we really tried to structure these strategies to kind of find that middle ground. So next slide, Josh. Thank you. So first, as you can see on this slide, and this is straight from the guidance, we've structured it to put the challenges and the solutions side by side to provide a quick reference sheet of a menu of strategies that could be used to address each challenge. You could see that the challenges that we heard alongside with the strategies that could be implemented to address that challenge, depending on your specific situation. And we'll go through each of those strategies here in a little bit. But this is the idea where when you go to the guidance, you can kind of work your way through from a topic to an issue to a strategy to help figure out exactly what might work for your community. So topic 1 here encompasses the challenges related to the quality of materials submitted in a manner that delay or extend the process. What we heard through the survey and discussions was that the submittal requirements are potentially ambiguous. Staff members may not be experienced in understanding how to apply the requirements to a particular application, or the materials submitted are either inaccurate or incomplete to meet the standards or the approval criteria. These challenges all centered around the accuracy of quality of the materials being submitted, and the strategies, as you could see, are both related to the materials being submitted as well as the clarity in what is being required to be submitted. Next slide, Josh. Topic 2 includes the strategy challenges that which result in extending the review timeline. Obviously, this is a big part of the expedited review. The survey responses identified external review agencies lack of coordination, and lack of experience in staff, as well as incomplete or inaccurate information, being the main contributors to extending the timeline. Other factors included public meeting schedules. Actually, that was a great question. I think it was Sarah early on, that where the meeting timeline can really impact the overall timeline of the review. All of these challenges here that we identify can extend the review process. So we've identified some strategies that could help expedite those. Next, Josh. The third topic here identifies issues related to staff capacity. What we heard is that the number of land use application submissions are increasing, being submitted into jurisdictions, while many jurisdictions are also either understaffed or unable to hire staff to meet that increased demand. Furthering the challenge is that many of the staff members are inexperienced with reviewing the types of applications that are being submitted. Through the housing needs, we're starting to see different types of housing, affordable, multifamily in areas that may not normally see that type of application. So we're going to transition here into the strategies overview, but I just wanted to pause real quick and see if there's any questions about the topics or the structure of how we're structuring the guidance here. And I know we're running late, so maybe we don't wait too long. Delay. All right, hearing none, seeing none, we'll go ahead onto the overview. So first off, the strategies listed in this guidance are not intended to be a complete list by any means. They are strategies to address the specific challenges brought up and discussed through the course of this project. And the intent is that as DOLA becomes more aware of different strategies that work through the state and in other states, those will be added to this guidance. It'll be on a website type guidance, so it won't really be a PDF. So there'll be it can easily be updated. Nope, keep there, Josh. Sorry. Yeah, I did shift this one around a little bit to give a little more clarity. So furthermore, the strategies are ordered alphabetically, and they are not intended to be listed in any sort of priority list. Since each community is facing different challenges and different development impacts, the strategies must be implemented based on local circumstances to be successful. So we're not suggesting that one is more important than the other in this guidance, but simply giving a menu of items. We also recognize that there are a number of communities throughout the state that have already implemented many of these strategies. If you are one of them, well done, good job, but don't stop there. There's opportunity for improvement and additional coordination. And I think that what I'm pretty happy about these strategies, and we'll get into that in a second, is that they provide some leniency and some expansion to be able to coordinate more. Yeah, so again, the emphasis of these strategies is to exemplify the partnership between reviewing agencies and the applicants to really create expectations and that partnership. To simplify the implementation, the guidance provides 3 sections for each of the strategies. Section 1 is the purpose, which explains the intent of the strategy, and we'll go through each of those in a little bit. Essentially, this is the challenge of the strategy seeks to address. Section 2 of each strategy talks about the measure of success, and this helps describe what successful implementation of the strategy could look like. And the last section of each strategy is a pro tip. And here's where, if you're already doing something or doing that, let's say you already have a development review committee, maybe the pro tip can help you think of different ways to further expand or make that a little bit more efficient to increase the efficiency of the process. All right, so Josh, next slide as we get into each of these. So the first strategy here may seem a little bit unrelated or obvious almost, but if there is a community-wide affordable housing plan which establishes the clear need and increases awareness and support for the community, acceptance of the affordable housing projects will allow the process to occur with fewer obstructions. So this talks about at a higher level community-wide. And so I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. And if there are other questions, we can come back at the end. This next strategy suggests that a local government develop a specific process which is quicker than the typical review process for projects which qualify as affordable housing project. This, could be incorporated into your land use regulations with specific requirements or standards in order to qualify. A significant component of this strategy would be to increase the level of coordination between internal and external review agencies to make sure there's agreement on the types of applications that would be expedited. Next, Josh. Next is the application checklists and guides. This suggests that jurisdictions either evaluate existing checklists or develop new documents. It seems obvious that these should list the required submittal documents and provide a process overview with timeline. However, it could also identify the expectations, roles, and responsibilities of both the applicant and jurisdiction. Go a little bit beyond just the nuts and bolts of it and identify some expectations. Strategy 4 here suggests or describes a step communities can take to understanding how well the current code is aligned with these and other affordable housing strategies. An assessment is a low-risk, high-reward step a community can take to determine how to better align community priorities with code requirements and standards. Recommendations of the assessment can specify the level of effort needed to align these documents and these standards. If your community and department are ready for an update and you already know that you need to do that, the focus could be to draft standards that are clear enough to allow administrative approvals for projects which are aligned with these community priorities. So again, creating at a higher level that community buy-in and community alignment with the priorities. Contracted planning staff, we have as a strategy number 5 here. This is one way to increase staff capacity and expertise by clearly identifying the expertise and services being sought. Your community could partner with a firm or individual to provide valuable capacity in both time and knowledge. So this could be a good opportunity to create a clear RFP in what your needs might be. Strategy number 6 seeks to expand capacity and decrease review time by developing subject matter expert in application types and assigning a single point of contact throughout the process. By developing a staff member who is assigned to all affordable housing projects, they become intimately familiar with the intricacies of these projects and can facilitate and support the application all the way through the process. It's a good opportunity to build that internal staff capacity as well. Next is the Development Review Committee. When used most effectively, a Development Review Committee or DRC meeting can be a powerful means to creating coordinated and comprehensive review comments. They allow for various reviewing agencies to discuss the project and discuss possible comments and concerns to ensure all issues are brought up clearly. By coordinating the review process or the comments, the clarity and comprehensiveness of the comments will assist in expediting the review process in both the response and the second review period. Next, Josh. This next strategy focuses on developing an agreement between municipalities, a county, special districts, or other referral agencies in establishing cooperative planning activities between these entities. Establishing the cooperation allows applications to move smoothly through the review process. These IGAs or MOUs allow a deliberate conversation about priorities, timelines, and review procedures. This is one that we heard throughout this process about external review agencies. And here is maybe a more formal way to memorialize that relationship and those shared priorities. Next, Josh. Thanks. The basis for this strategy here, level of approval, is that if a project clearly implements community priorities and meets all standards and regulations, the project should be approved administratively. Again, that's a pretty broad brush statement there, but when written well, your code could have that type of analysis in there. However, because of this, this can be realized. So in order to be able to get that to that level, a strong community engagement process should be utilized to understand the community priorities and development standards that align with these priorities. So this is after a significant community improvement engagement process that this would occur. All right. Next, Josh, and I promise we're almost through these. So post-review meeting. I wish the alphabet went a little bit differently because the next one is pre-application meeting. It should have gone the other way, but we'll just go alphabetically. So post-review meeting. This strategy is about setting up a meeting after an application is reviewed and comments are sent. It gives an opportunity for the agency representatives who provided the comments and the applicant to further explain what the intent or the purpose of the comments are. The intent of this is to reduce the amount of time for the applicant to respond to comments and how long it should take in the second review. So again, more coordination and clarification. The next one is the pre-application meeting. This is a meeting between the applicant and the reviewing agencies before the submittal of an application to help facilitate the review process. This meeting should provide the applicant with clear guidance on the submittal requirements and some of the specifics as we talked about, but it should also identify the roles, responsibilities of the different players in that process, the reviewing agencies, external review agencies, and identify the expectations for all in order to meet the review timelines. Because again, this is making sure that we have both parties, both the reviewing agencies as well as the applicants on the same page to meet these this 90-day requirement. Next, Josh. All right. So if your community truly wants to address affordable housing, adopting a policy, whether it's formal or informal, prioritizing affordable housing application types would have a significant impact. This would require, as we've said previously and a few others, that it would require agreement with referral agencies as well to make sure that there is an understanding that if an application meets certain criteria, it either moves up on top of the pile or in front of the line. So again, just making sure that there's a lot of coordination with external review agencies. Strategy 13 suggests that communities could evaluate their overall review process, whether specific to affordable housing or not, to identify areas for increased efficiencies or removing unnecessary steps. The intent of any process improvement effort is to identify areas for improvements, to be it coordination, removal of duplicate efforts, or simply reducing the overall timeline it takes to complete. After all, we're in this together and trying to make sure that the applicants and the government reviewing agencies are doing everything that we can to expedite that process. Next. This strategy 14 is an evaluation of internal policies related to public meeting schedule and noticing subsequent meetings. In some communities, it is the policy to not notify multiple public meetings or hearings at the same time. So for example, if a planning commission meeting is required to receive a recommendation to council or the board, some communities will wait until after the planning commission meeting to notify the council meeting. This may cause an inadvertent delay in the review process. Alternatively, you could evaluate that policy and notice both hearings at the same time in order to reduce the overall timeline to the decision. Next, Josh. So here we have strategy 15 is training, and we've broken it into two subsections, if you will. So this first one, which is reviewer training, is understanding the type of applications that your community foresees and seeking training for staff members to increase working knowledge of the anticipated application types. While it may be easy to find basic online training or use some more experienced staff to help with that training, engaging the contractors and the developers and the referral agencies could also increase the overall efficiencies while building the relationships through the development review process. And then this next one is somewhat similar. That's why we put them as A and B, but something that's more focused on the applicant or the developer side. And this is a good, this could be put on by the local government or the planning or community development department in an effort to provide more understanding and a better working knowledge of the applicable regulations, the staff interpretations of such various provisions of the code or the regulations, and the considerations and methods to reviewing applications. This strategy could also suggest holding regularly scheduled listening sessions between the reviewing agencies and staff and the developers who submit applications to build a more collaborative process and increase that feedback loop to continually improve. So that's all for the strategies. We went through those pretty quick, and I'm just going to go ahead and run through these here real quick, just a few more slides, and then we can get to the questions and answers. So in the guidance, you'll see that we have community examples. This list of community examples is not a comprehensive list, as I mentioned earlier. We attempted to identify communities of various geographies as well as a variety of sizes who are currently utilizing some of these strategies. At the same time, we're not necessarily endorsing these as great examples, but places that you all can go and see how other communities are implementing this. So this list here for topic 1, it focuses on quality of submission materials, as well as identifies, you can see there, online guides and documents, pre-application requirements, and submittals. So just some examples. And then I think, as Josh mentioned early on, there are additional examples as well as links to all of these websites and community sites to give you some further examples of what other communities are doing. Topic 2, the review timelines are highlighted by this group of communities who have developed expedited review processes and other tactics to support an efficient review process. And again, as you can see, a variety of strategies are used to implement that. And next one, Josh. Many communities are addressing staffing needs in ways that fit their needs specifically. So increasing communities are turning to outsourcing or contracted planning support services. Others are developing programs internally that will provide support to the applicants through the review process. So again, there are some really good examples out there of communities here in Colorado and then others around the country doing these. So that wraps up the portion of the strategies, and I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Robin to facilitate any other questions we might have here.
Great, thank you, TJ. And if there are other communities across Colorado that are doing strategies that you think we should know about, reach out, let me know. We'd love to feature you on the site if you're willing. We do have a question in the chat from Dawn asking, I'll try and paraphrase here, can cities put in restrictions on the number of 30-day extensions that the local government could allow? And I would say the answer to that is yes, you can set your local policy. The statute allows you multiple extensions. Your local policy could say, we're only going to allow 2. So, and then the second part of what Don asks, at some point, it will draw resources in an impactful way. Likewise, that ability is there to have what ability is there to have expedited fees as deadlines are missed, again, to deal with the cost of delays or potentially hiring outside guns. Hope that makes sense. Yeah, it's a good point, and I again want to emphasize that your local policy, you will need to develop your local policy, and you have some flexibility in what your local policy says, as long as it complies with minimum standards in the statute. But yeah, I think there's a good point here made that deadlines on fees, it could become an issue that slows down the process. Mo, jump in here.
Yeah, I would just recommend stakeholdering on any of this, making sure that nobody's surprised with whatever you come up with, whether they agree with it or disagree with it. That would be my recommendation. So spend some time thinking about what works best for your jurisdiction within the framework of the law, as Robin said, and utilizing these guidelines as best as possible, but really discuss with your constituents and the developers, et cetera, that are interested in operating your jurisdiction, but what makes the most sense, and going from there.
That's a great suggestion. Another question or comment in the chat here from Sherry says, was there any discussion on expiring approvals and or extensions of approvals during development of this guidance? Trying to think back on whether that topic really came up.
I would like to hear more about this.
Yeah, Sherry, would you like to come off mic and discuss? Is that a scenario that happens a lot in your community?
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, and maybe this isn't something that's going to happen very frequently, but every now and then you have projects that have an approval, say, of a site plan, and that approval may have a time period, say a year, maybe longer, for the developer to move to a certain specific step. Let's say to a building permit. And perhaps there's issues of construction drawings being developed or environmental issues that pop up late in the process, funding, lack of funding, some major issue that causes the project not to be able to move ahead. And then it could end up with either facing an expiration or requesting an extension of that approval. And maybe that's something that is purely going to be open to the local governmental agency to continue to administer. I think most communities probably have those regulations in place now. But I was just curious if you guys had talked about that and how the 90 days might be factored into that.
I can start, and I know we did talk about post approvals because we also talked about appeals if those come up post approval process, things like that. And so we really wanted to kind of separate any of those post approval steps and pieces, because there are so many unknowns and variables there. And to your point, Sherry, a lot of local communities do have different expiration timeframes and things like that. And the language here doesn't get into post approvals or anything like that. It's just about that review process for applications. Is kind of where the Proposition 123 expedited review process language stems.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question.
We have another question or comment in the chat from Signy. Projects partners with PHAs, public housing agencies, where PHA is a special limited partner, are exempt from property and sales tax, and often exempt from review fee, PB fees, etc. Any thoughts on how to respond on this one?
I don't think so. I'm not sure what the question fully is, I guess, at least on my end.
This seems like it might be a response to the earlier question about additional fees and
Yeah.
the statute, Prop 123, doesn't get into fees at all. So we really were through this whole process trying to constrain ourselves to the language in the proposition, and fees were never talked about one way or another.
Right. All right. It's about 3:15. I just want to note that earlier in the chat, I shared right around the top of the hour, I did share the link to the fast track guidance. It is there on the screen. You can find the guidance materials on all of this expedited review requirement at cdola.colorado.gov/Prop 123 fast track. And I think if you did a little Google search for that term, Prop 123 fast track, DOLA guidance, it would probably pop up to the top of your search. So everything we've covered today is in that website. You can read from start to finish, from the intro to the conclusion, but it also gives you the ability to jump from one section to another. It has places that says see more or see strategy number 10. And contact info is on the website as well. So if you get to something and you feel like you have more questions, you're welcome to reach out to us and ask. And again, just a final plug that there is grant funding available to help your community implement expedited review. The next funding cycle opens May 1st through June 3rd, the local planning capacity grant program. I also dropped that link in the chat earlier. We can stick around a little longer for anyone who wants to continue asking questions or dialogue about any of this. So feel free to speak up if you have any more questions or comments. Lastly, I also want to recognize all the partners that helped us through our stakeholder engagement process, the organizations, the individuals, the members of the development community, and all the local governments who participated. We really couldn't have done this without you. Your input was invaluable, and we're glad that you were with us through the process. All right, we'll just hang out a little longer if anyone has questions, and otherwise have a lovely rest of your day. And I'll go ahead and end the recording here.